And so I was fairly desperate at that time, and I knew that they had what they call their fall list, the list of all the books they publish in the latter part of the year. And I knew that my book had to be on there to get out before the election. And so when they wouldn't return my phone calls or talk to me, I eventually made an appointment just to fly up to New York City and see them. And it was only at that time that they returned my phone call. And I told the editor, who was Alice Mayhew, who was Bob Woodward's editor, a very famous editor, that the book needed to go before the election and we needed to get going. And she said she wasn't going to do it. They were not going to do the book before the election. And I said, why not? All this stuff about Bush, the American public needs to know. And she said, quote, George Bush is going to win anyway. And of course, it turned out to be wrong, but even so, that struck me as nonsense. I mean, what difference does that make about getting the information before the public? And how does she know that what's going to happen in 10 months or so?
Why do you think Simon & Schuster refused to publish the book before the election? It was ready to go, right?
Well, it was basically ready, and if they'd wanted to, they could have. I mean, it was not. I mean, Simon & Schuster is a very big company. I mean, I eventually got the book published before the election with a small company. I mean, they could have put 2 editors on it, and we could have done it. Mm-hmm. They didn't. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speculate on their motives, but there's some interesting connections. In fact, I knew this going in. I knew about the connections between Simon & Schuster and George Bush and the Houston power brokers.
Oh, what was that?
Well, one of George Bush's best friends and longtime business associates, Hugh Ledke, chairman of the board of Pennzoil, is on the board of directors of Simon & Schuster's parent corporation, Paramount Communications. And Hugh Ledke is actually in my book in regard to a very strange bank in Houston that he was on the board of. Also, Paramount Communications used to be the successor company to Gulf and Western, the conglomerate that one of the founding fathers is John Duncan of Houston, whose brother Charles was Secretary of Energy under the Carter administration. And these people are in investments with people who connect to Walter Mischer and back to George Bush. And so I knew this going in. I just thought it'd be poetic justice for Simon & Schuster to publish this book, but apparently they knew about it too, I guess. I mean,
Pete, you've been dealing with some pretty unsavory and dangerous characters here, the CIA and the Mafia. Have you had any threats on your life, or have you been fearful of it?
Well, not that I know of. I mean, I'm kind of slow. Maybe I got threatened and I didn't realize it, but nothing directly. I mean, these people usually leave reporters, and they don't, threaten reporters. I mean, they may try to keep the book from being published, or they might threaten you with I've been threatened with lawsuits.
Oh.
I mean, they will do that, but not physically threatened. And, the way they operate is to keep people like Simon & Schuster from publishing the book, or keep anybody from publishing, or keeping it from being distributed. And so, they work indirectly, I mean, if anything happened to me, that would just bring more publicity on this, and which is the last thing they want. I mean, the way they're reacting to the book is that they're really sort of kind of hunkering down and ignoring it, and figuring that any publicity will vanish eventually and disappear.
Have you been contacted by Larry King yet, or any of the talk shows?
The national media has shown no interest in this.
The one exception is the Village Voice, that published an excellent article on your book and on your research by Jonathan Quitney, who's also an investigative reporter of some renown.
Right. That happened when Simon & Schuster told me they were not going to publish before the election. I contacted Quitney. I had been in touch with Jonathan Quitney because he'd written a number of books on the Mafia and the CIA. And I wanted to sort of do a reality check and send the manuscript to Quitney and ask him whether he thought it should be published before the election, just to make sure that I wasn't hallucinating. Maybe Simon & Schuster was right. And so I sent the manuscript to Quitney, and he read it and agreed with me that it should be published before the election. And he was helping me, get the information out, and actually was had gone to a number of different publications to try to do, you know, a serialization of the book, and eventually the Village Voice did it, but just barely before the election. And even though the book was printed 4 weeks before the election, it really didn't get out. I mean, it should have been out in the summer. You know, I really apologize. I did everything that I knew how, and if you told somebody in, say, May of this year that you could get a book published in 5 months, they would have laughed at you, said it was not possible. Well, we did it, but just barely.
Pete, let's talk a little bit about the sort of final response of your work by the establishment, by journalists, Congress, and then possibly the public, and how you reacted to the sort of non-response of the sort of journalist establishment and then the Congress. You yourself were a reporter for the Houston Post. You published these articles about the CIA and the SNLs that were explosive investigative reporting, and they just weren't picked up by the national media. What did this lead you to conclude towards the press in the United States?
Well,
did this change your attitude in any way?
Well, I mean, some of the press picked up the stories, but the television networks and the big three, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal, never did anything. And I personally think the reason they didn't was because it wasn't their story, okay, and they like to do their own investigative work, and they were very far behind. It would have been impossible for them to do the work it would take to do these stories in a manner that would, you know, that would be a good job. And these institutions had not even done the SNL stories right. I mean, they had basically done a little bit, but it was all they were just recycling the work that had basically been done by the Dallas Morning News and Byron Harris and WFAA in Dallas, which was to write about all the wheeler dealer, Don Dixon, Ed McBurney types. And that began to be sort of the pattern of investigative reporting. If you did investigative reporting on SNLs, you wrote about all the wild and crazy guys down in Texas that were looting these SNLs, and you didn't do what you should have done, which was follow the money. I mean, that's the big advice, you know, Deep Throat gave Bob Woodward in Watergate. Follow the money. That's where the story is. That's where the story is in the SNLs, but the reporters did not do that. It was right about the front men, the wild and crazy guys. So these institutions did not do a very good job on the SNLs. So they didn't have the foundation to do either the Mafia or the CIA involvement. So, you know, if you don't do something, they're the kind of institutions and people that just ignore it, you know. It's not our story, it's not worth doing. We're just going to ignore it. You know, if we didn't do it, it must not be worth anything. So that's exactly what happened.
Now, what about Congress? When you first made these revelations that the CIA was involved in robbing the CIA, the savings and loan, and using the money to help support the Contras and other illegal off-the-book operations, Congress made some noise that they were going to do some investigation. What came out of this?
Well, actually, the House Permanent Subcommittee on Intelligence, which has oversight of the CIA, did a preliminary investigation by their staff, and eventually came up and said there's nothing to this. But it's there are several interesting points to note. Number one, they never did what they should have done, which was track any of the money. They relied on the CIA for all their information, and even the CIA admitted that of the 20 institutions we named, that they had dealt with 4 of them, and that they had dealt with 5 of the individuals we had named, but they had done nothing wrong. And the thing is that the staff director of the House Intelligence Committee, who was overseeing the investigation, a guy named Dan Childs, had come from he was the chief financial officer of the CIA, and had been brought over to the Intelligence Subcommittee right before my stories came out. And the CIA, of course, was aware. I mean, I had been talking to them for months, so they knew that my stories were going to break soon. Dan Childs also had been brought in 10 years earlier, and the Senate Intelligence Committee that had been doing the church investigation. It was exposing all the illegal domestic activities of the CIA. Childs had been brought in for damage control. It certainly looked like he was being brought in for damage control. And in fact, after they released their report saying there was nothing to this, Childs went back to the CIA. Now he's the executive assistant to the CIA director.
This is shameless. It's like this guy Polgar, who was put in charge of investigating Iran-Contra, who was another lifetime CIA operative, station chief of about 6 different places, as you point out in your book. So basically, Congress didn't do anything.
No.
They covered it up. The press really didn't do anything. And now the Clinton administration faces as much as a $500 billion price tag for the CIA scandal. So what can the government finally do about this?
Congress and the Justice Department can track the money. That's all they have to do. And if there was fraud involved, they can get it back. And they haven't done this. I mean, everybody's acting like it's a foregone conclusion that we've lost $500 billion. You know, okay, taxpayers, take the hit and go on. It's not true. The Justice Department is very capable of tracking this money. They can track drug money that starts out as cash in the United States, goes offshore and comes back. Surely they can track S&L money that's always a paper or wire transfer. It's easy to track if you got subpoena power. Congress could do it, but they're not doing it. And I don't know whether Clinton is going to make the Justice Department do this or not. You know, it's going to be interesting to see who the new Attorney General is going to be and whether they're going to go out. I mean, I don't see any indication on Clinton's part that he has any interest in kicking this sleeping dog. And I think he just wants to let it lie and not mess with it, because his party is just as involved as the Republicans. And so I don't see, there's going to have to just be mass revolt by the American people, and the American people don't have the information.
So what is the responsibility of the press and the citizens to do something about this S&L scandal?
Well, I mean, the press has got to do the reporting and the citizens have to do the complaining.
You're watching Alternative Views. We turn now to some news stories from the alternative press. World Press Review has some stories, some opinions of various newspapers around the world. Most of the quotes are, not all that significant, but there are a couple of them that I thought you might be interested in. One from Munich Independent newspaper says it's difficult to discern a program or policy in the new president's persona. He succeeded in pleasing everyone and antagonizing no one, and it was a very perfect marketing strategy. So their conclusion was that Clinton was not elected, Bush was summarily fired. And in Tehran, they said that our experience with the USA during the past half-century has left us with no illusions about either Republicans or Democrats. A desire for hegemony is so deep-rooted in the psyche of the American political establishment that the new president, even though he's a Democrat, has no choice but to tread the path of norm in traditional USA foreign policy.
One of Bill Clinton's chief campaign pledges was to limit the influence of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Well, the New York Times news service reports that his transition team has extensive industry and ties to foreign countries. For instance, Vernon Jordan, the transition chairman, earns at least $442,000 a year in fees from sitting on the boards of 11 corporate giants, including Union Carbide, American Express, Xerox, and the debt-laden RJR Nabisco. Jordan also holds almost $1 million worth of stock in these companies. And his law firm, Aiken Gump Hauer & Feld, represents at least 7 of these corporations as well, and as a senior partner, he shares in the law firm's profits. The transition director, working right under Jordan, Warren Christopher, is the senior partner in one of the nation's largest law firms, O'Melveny & Myers, whose clients include Mitsui, Sumitomo Trust and Banking, Japan Airlines, and Hyundai. And during the campaign, Clinton made a point of criticizing lobbyists who work for foreign interests, but the Japanese interests, at least, are well represented in his transition team. As well, Christopher earned at least $73,000 last year from sitting on the boards of Lockheed Corporation and Southern California Edison, and his firm also represents both corporations. So you can imagine what sort of feelings this person is going to have about regulating utilities and also military cutbacks. Also, Mickey Cantor, another board member on the transition team, is a member of Manet Phillips and Cantor, which has done work for the governments of Cyprus and Jamaica, and for a wide array of for-profit healthcare corporations, real estate, and transportation firms. He also does lobbying for Japan's NEC Corporation, the cable television industry, and a number of big oil companies. He also, on the side, conducted a policy briefing for a number of his clients and potential clients, including General Electric. Samuel Berger, another member, the transition team's foreign policy director, also has for years presided over an international trade firm, the international trade practice at Hogan and Hartson, a law firm whose clients have included Poland, Czechoslovakia, the Bahamas, Ontario, Japan again, and the trading arm of China, as well as the Toshiba Corporation of Japan. And when Toshiba got in trouble with the U.S. government for exporting sensitive technology to the former Soviet Union, Berger was there in Washington helping to defend Toshiba's interests. As Ralph Nader put it, Cesar Chavez isn't getting any calls, and there have been widespread complaints from the coalition that elected Clinton, which includes many civil rights leaders, people working for migrant farmers, people working for other minority rights, that people from these institutions just haven't been called upon. Clinton's gone for the traditional lobbyists and lawyers who have always been sitting inside the Beltway dictating what's done to the congressman.
I think it's very significant that, what was that, from the New York Times, Washington Post?
New York Times News Service.
Right. See, they're not going to point out other connections and interconnections with Clinton and the staff that he's putting together. For instance, I look at the sociology of leadership. What organizations do these people come from? And who are the other people that they associate with? Well, Bill Clinton was a member of the Bilderberger, that secret organization, as well as the Council on Foreign Relations. Vernon Jordan is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. Warren Christopher is a member of all three of those elite organizations. Little Henry Cisneros is a member of the CFR. And of course, Lloyd Bentsen, they say are going to be our new Secretary of Treasury. He is attended Bilderberg meetings recently as well. So the people that Clinton has in his transition team are people from this very small group of elite organizations. And very few people are members of these organizations. Council on Foreign Relations only has about 1,500 to 1,700. But the number of people in government from these organizations is huge compared to their size. So we're seeing the same type of thing that we did before in the in the Bush and Reagan years. They came from these organizations.
Well, the Carter people too.
And the Carter. So it's just basically Carter. Carter revisited, except Clinton is more conservative than Carter, and Clinton came from the Democratic Leadership Council, which was a rebellion against the liberal hegemony of the Democrats. And I saw a statistic where it said that the Congress people who also support the Democratic Leadership Council, they voted with the Reagan-Bush years. They voted for Reagan and Bush 80 to 90% of the time. So it's questionable as how much change Bill Clinton wants or how much he can achieve even if he wants it.
So this, I think, is a major indication that, at least when it comes to economics, it's going to be business as usual with the Clinton administration. My guess is that Clinton's going to continue the conservative policies of the previous decade in the area of economics and foreign policy, and he'll have a much more liberal agenda on social issues.
World Press Review has a couple of articles about the Mafia, which are really quite disturbing. It says that the Mafia, like the rest of the economy in the 80s, has gone global and has forged alliances wherever it's needed to, killed wherever it's needed to, and is sponsoring indigenous crime syndicates under its control in a lot of countries where they weren't operating before, particularly, say, in Eastern Europe. It has managed to come to grips and work out relationships with the Turkish heroin bosses, the Colombia drug cartels. So internationally, it's stronger than it ever has been. And even, you know, you hear references here and there to the Russian Mafia taking over so much of what is happening in the chaos in Russia right now. Well, that Mafia is actually connected with the Italian Sicilian Mafia. Things have changed a bit, though, and that the Mafia still kills in Italy. They've seen that. However, they've kind of gone along with the Colombian style of killing now. They use, instead of just very clean assassinations with rifles or so, or submachine guns, they're doing it now with car bombs, which actually kill a lot of civilians as well. As an indication of the strength and internationalization of the Mafia, on St. Valentine's Day, appropriately enough, in 1989, there was a meeting in Nice of members of the international consortium of illegals, the Sicilian Mafia, which is the octopus, the giant mafia. They also, with representatives of the Colombian and Venezuelan cartels, well, they all got together so that they could divide up the world's spoils, so that they wouldn't have competition with each other, they wouldn't be trampling on each other, or they wouldn't have to be killing each other. Cartelization of crime around the world. And what's happening in Italy? There have been some well-publicized assassinations recently, and the people have had a lot of outcry against the Mafia. But this has been going on for some time. There will be assassinations, people come up in arms, there will be investigations, and the government say, well, we're going to do something about it, but then nothing ever gets done. It's business as usual. And that is because, according to the World Press Review articles, the establishment in Italy is right in bed, has a very cozy working relationship with the Mafia, and so they're not doing anything about it. So they're becoming stronger and stronger all around the world. It's ironic, this parallel development with international capital, and the Mafia keeps lockstep right along with it.
Well, according to the New York Times, a rising cost of modernity is depression. If the 20th century ushered in the age of anxiety, its exit, according to the Times, is witnessing the dawn of the age of melancholy. The first international study of major depression reveals a steady rise in the disorder worldwide. The nations as diverse as the United States, Taiwan, Lebanon, and New Zealand, in these countries in each generation, the possibility of getting serious depression, not just sadness, but a paralyzing listlessness, dejection, self-depreciation, and overwhelming sense of hopelessness, that these days, it's 3 times likelier that you're going to get this depression, it's going to set in, than your grandparents. There's been a lot of speculation of why melancholy is on the rise. Some speculate that loss in a belief of God takes away a buffer against life's setbacks. Others say the distress created in women by the spread of unattainable ideals of female beauty is a cause, whereas others say that it's physiological, that it has to do more with exposure to toxic substances. And there's been a big debate over why younger Americans also in recent years have had a much, much higher case of melancholy than the former generation. Recent studies in journals in the United States indicate that there's a much, much higher proportion of people that are getting melancholy these days, and it's become a modern epidemic.
I have a couple of short articles here on Poland, one from the World Press Review of, let's see, where does it have? December 1992. And the other from Dollars and Cents, where's that from? Also December 1992. The World Press Review says that the Polish government foresees 5 more years of recession before things start becoming a little bit better for the people in Poland. And it seems that even that 5 years, taking that long, was a compromise between the reformists and the people who want to go a little bit slower and ease the pain. But according to dollars and cents, it's ironic that the people who are supposedly foisting this on the people, all this pain, are the people who actually used to come from the labor ranks. You remember Lech Walesa was the leader of the labor union Solidarity. Now, in the summer of '92, a group of unions that had spearheaded Solidarity are now going out on wildcat strikes against Solidarity and the Walesa leadership. But there's a very interesting quote by the Prime Minister, who, when the workers started striking, she sent out dismissal notices to them. They just kick them out, and so the leaders of the strike immediately scaled back their wage demands. Well, the woman who was the Prime Minister came from a satellite party of the communists originally, back in 1984, and she was expelled from the party for voting against taking away Solidarity's legal status. But she's changed her mind now. Here's what she says about the workers. For 40 years, the workers were treated as the most important class on which the whole system of the state stood. And it's very bitter for them to understand that the new conditions require them to step down to a very low status. And that brings us to the end of this Alternative Views. Frequently hear from viewers who request a list of news publications, which we use on Alternative Views, and also a reading list for U.S. power structure in the mass media. If you would like to have these, send a stamped, self-addressed envelope to the Alternative Information Network, P.O. Box 7279, Austin, Texas 78713.